I can't recall the last time I had heard more buzz about a film in recent memory than The Substance. I couldn't find it playing near me, so I sat on it, impatient and avoiding spoilers as best I could. I finally signed up for some streaming service I'd never heard of just to watch it. I'm going to say this in advance. If this is the best that indie horror films can cook up for us, we're screwed. But this isn't a review. For us as storytellers, we learn as much from the good as we do from the bad. Sometimes we learn a lot from the bad. This is one of those cases. Before we get into that, though, please slap the like button and tickle the subscribe. They like that sort of thing. Weird little buttons down there. Alright, not a bizarre intro at all. Nailed it. I'm going to start by saying I wanted to like this film. I jumped through a ton of hoops to watch this film. I avoided the spoilers, got hyped, and went in with no expectations. Even as I was watching this train wreck unfold, I ignored the little things that were bothering me, even as they piled up, to try and tough through it. I mean, by the time I'd gotten to sit down for this, it had already won a Golden Globe. There had to be a reason a horror movie won a Golden Globe, right? At about 3/4 of the way through, I knew it was going to be bad, but I was now in the sunk cost fallacy territory and I finished it. I gave this film every chance I possibly could. Then I went ahead and I read the script. Perhaps the author's vision was compromised by an incompetent director. Spoiler alert, the director shot the exact movie that's on the page, almost too perfectly. From here on, here's a big fat spoiler warning, as I will be discussing the entire film in great detail. With that out of the way, what is this film about? The Substance is about Elizabeth Sparkle, an aging movie star that was once a darling in Hollywood. When she finds herself fired from her daytime fitness show, she becomes desperate enough to try the substance, which births a younger self out of her back. The rest of the film, as you can imagine, is a predictable and shallow statement about how Hollywood washes out aging female talent. Somehow, it not only screws that up, but it ignores its own conceit and low-hanging fruits of its plot points to tell a nonsensical story in the most ham-fisted way possible. Like, literally if this movie was a cartoon, it would have still been a crappy cartoon, but a lot of the style decisions would have made more sense. Let's start right at the beginning. I'm going to get into a few things that ruffled my feathers very early on and were a bad sign that this story was going to be terrible. We're focused on Elizabeth Sparkle's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at the onset. Then she's standing on it with a crowd of people snapping pictures. One voice shouts, "We love you," about 3 times in the span of 10 seconds. Why is that bugging me? Have you ever been stuck watching TMZ? Paparazzi don't talk like that. You know when paparazzi talk like that? In movies and cartoons. It's dumb and unimaginative, and what someone that doesn't know what Hollywood is like would make up based on things they've seen. After that, and this is all in the same intro, some tourist drops his burger on the star, then tries and fails to clean it with the oily paper the burger came in. Look, there are 2 types of people in this world. A person that spills something in public and fully cleans it to the best of their ability, and the other person that just keeps walking like it never happened. There is no in-between. Again, this is the ham-fisted way of conveying that Elizabeth Sparkle has been dirtied over time, but these days no one is going to care. Get used to this. If you're like me, you're going to find yourself shouting, "Alright, we get it already," as you get beaten over the head with kindergarten-level metaphors, as if you won't get it unless there's a flashing neon sign above it. Then we move on to Elizabeth herself, filming her daytime fitness show. As soon as I saw this, I was like, okay, so we're in the 80s. Except we're not. In the next scene, we're going to see a character on their smartphone. So, out of all the shows in the world that you could have made a statement about, you chose a format that hasn't been used since the 1980s. Like, literally, I don't even know where you'd find a daytime aerobic show, let alone one led by a washed-up starlet at the end of her career. This was really the best choice? Okay, well, let's just keep going with this alternate universe of Earth where aerobics is still popular and film studios make use of the hallway from The Shining. Ugh. The next scene is another tragic lesson in poor writing. Elizabeth, without a working women's room in the studio that she somehow didn't know about until now, runs into the men's room. While in the stall, the network director comes into the bathroom while having a conversation on his smartphone. He's talking about how the studio needs someone young and hot and how Elizabeth is old and useless to them. You know, because you've seen this 100 times, this is contrived serendipity. There's a huge difference between the cliché of a cute couple bumping into each other for the first time in a hallway. Papers fly everywhere, their eyes meet. It's overused, but we get it. That's just dumb chance. The women's room not being available, Elizabeth choosing to use the men's room at the exact same time that her boss comes in while having a conversation about replacing her because she's not hot anymore. That is eye-roll inducing at its best. Sloppy, lazy writing that just wanted to move the plot along on page 2 without any basis in reality whatsoever. Somehow, we're only 5 minutes in and I'm already so annoyed. But now we're going to the single most egregious offense. In the following scene, the same network director is eating at a restaurant with Elizabeth, presumably to fire her. He has the most abnormally large plate of whole shrimp you've ever seen, as his greasy fingers yank off their heads, dip them to the very bottom of his sauce cup, and then he wipes his disgusting hands on the white tablecloth. It is so unbelievably overdone and gross that I had to imagine this was the director going over the top to the point that this guy was a cartoon character. Nope, it was written that way, complete with the slurp noises in the actual dialogue. Okay, so I've complained a lot here without really teaching much, so let's fix that. What does it mean when writing is said to be ham-fisted? Okay. This network director is meant to be a gluttonous pig in Hollywood. He only wants to devour young, beautiful women and eat food. He's even named Harvey, for God's sake. You don't ever have to beat your audience over the head this hard with your messaging. Gluttony can be conveyed as simply as showing a large number of plates on his side of the table. It isn't necessary that he's using a tablecloth as a napkin. All these unrealistic caricatures of people can pile up really quick. If you're aiming for a sort of hyper-reality where your messaging is very heavy-handed, even then you don't have to resort to tactics like these. To see what I mean about hyper-reality and messaging, watch or read A Scanner Darkly. This film is about the dangers of drug use and the fragility of the human mind, and is so uniquely and masterfully done because the characters are real and grounded in the world around them. This movie seems hell-bent on making a real-world commentary while completely turning the world into a cartoon of itself. Now, let's learn how to shoot ourselves in the foot and completely derail our own premise. The whole point of the substance itself is that Elizabeth wants to recapture her glory days of being a young and hot starlet. So she takes this black market drug that gives birth to a younger version of herself. We learn very quickly that if the schedule of switching bodies every week between the older, original Elizabeth and the younger one is not adhered to, there are permanent physical consequences for the older one. Alright, so on the surface that would sound like we're going to get a situation where the younger one is going to live life in the moment and damn herself by never wanting to go back. Except, there's a catch I literally can't make sense of. Elizabeth is not living vicariously through this younger version of herself. Their minds are not in any way connected, so she doesn't get to experience any of the benefits of this young clone, and she has to give up 2 weeks of every month of her life, and if this clone doesn't abide by the rules, only Elizabeth has to pay the consequences for it. Why would anyone do this? There's no upside. Elizabeth basically signed up for someone to go have fun and do young person things at the cost of her life, her time, and her health. What sense does that make? Somehow, this buffoon of a writer actually came up with a premise this shallow and obvious, yet still managed to miss all of the storytelling possible in their own kiddie pool of space. In this premise, there is literally no reason for Elizabeth to use the substance. If she was living through her younger self, we could talk about how Hollywood treats the same person differently based on age and looks, sometimes referred to as pretty privilege. We could show the dark side that this younger Elizabeth is willing to burn down her future, the last years of her life, and cause all this physical damage to her original body just to live like a 20-year-old again. But no. This younger self, Sue, begins ruining Elizabeth's body and life almost immediately, and there are no consequences for it. Elizabeth doesn't put a stop to it. Nothing. This is a really important lesson in understanding your own conceits and taking them to their logical conclusions. If you create a world where people have, say, teleportation, then you have to understand not just how cool it is and all the neat things that you would do with it, but you have to consider the opposite. With this teleportation power, be it magic or technology, what are the darkest purposes it could be used for? Delivery of contraband? Assassinations? Bank robberies? How about stalking? Tell me that stalking isn't 10 times more terrifying if someone could literally appear in your room while you're sleeping and still be able to claim they were 100 miles away at home all night. You have to consider these things because you're creating a world where they exist, and you live in one where they don't. Creating fantastical or technological marvels is great. Sci-fi and fantasy have been doing it for centuries. But the best ones are grounded in the reality we live in. When Elizabeth is so badly scarred by Sue not adhering to the once-a-week schedule, she decides to terminate Sue. This is the first sensical thing she's done this entire movie. However, when plunging the syringe into Sue's chest, some truly horrible, bad, generally awful writing comes up. Halfway through injecting this kill-your-clone juice into Sue, Elizabeth sees the billboard out her window with Sue on it. Suddenly, as if tempted by all of Sue's fame, Elizabeth reconsiders. Why? It isn't her fame. She isn't going to get to enjoy any of this. So why would she care what this selfish clone is doing? This is another problem with bad writing. Unearned emotion. When a character has a feeling that is sudden, contrived, or only serves the purposes of moving the plot forward, it often has this hiccup. Something about it doesn't feel right. This one is a little bit harder to define for us as an audience because it isn't a logical leap. It's more like an emotional leap. Yes, people can be erratic and unpredictable, and psychology is an amazing thing. That said, let's say you have a couple in your story. The wife gets the wrong box of cereal, and for whatever reason, the husband yells at her, slams the bedroom door shut, and locks her out. This is a disproportional reaction, but we can still connect the reaction to the cause. Here in The Substance, we're expected to believe that this selfish little clone is out there living the life Elizabeth wishes she could have back. She doesn't respect her original self, and Elizabeth is suffering all the consequences of that. Yet, in the moment where Elizabeth decides to call a stop to it, she has a change of heart. The change of heart makes no sense. I can't connect Elizabeth's feeling to anything that's happened. If anything, I'm still on the train of thought that ending Sue was the best solution. Keep in mind, at this point in the film, Elizabeth is now more like a bridge troll than a human being, another ridiculous and over-the-top choice that is literally in the script. As a matter of fact, the only thing that you can truly fault the director for that wasn't really on the page was these long, then even longer looks at Demi Moore and Margot Qualley's naked bodies. It was needlessly sexualized to the point of making you uncomfortable, but not for the statement it was making. More like, did you just tell him to stand there naked and filmed it for a while? Like, it was creepy, but not like movie creepy, like director creepy. And don't even get me started on how many different shots were ripped directly out of another movie. Anywho, so the bridge troll tries to kill Sue and has a change of heart. Somehow, this makes Sue wake up, meaning the two of them can exist at the same time, making you wonder why they had to switch at all. Sue is apparently Captain America strong, because what follows is the savage beating of Elizabeth that features kicks sending her across the entire apartment and, ultimately, killing the poor bridge troll. Now, with Elizabeth dead and no spinal fluid to fuel herself, Sue starts to physically fall apart. Alright, well, that sorta makes sense. What does she do about it? Well, even though the substance is a single dose, they gave her enough for 2, so Sue decides to take the substance in a desperate and nonsensical attempt to live on, I guess? I mean, Sue already knows she won't get to experience any of this. Her life is over. She's falling apart. If her own actions are any indication, a new clone would just make the last moments of her life miserable. But she takes it, and a horrible nightmare skin monster made up of a fusion between Sue and Elizabeth and random body parts comes out. This creature, despite being the size of a car and made up of two different people, tapes a picture of Sue on her disfigured face and decides to still try to perform at a live New Year's Eve special. I mean, I don't even know where to begin at this point. On the writing as an art scale, we've started the movie at finger painting. Now we're just toddlers smearing their diaper on the wall. Nothing matters anymore, let's just go for it. Also, I'm not exaggerating when I say that the script is just as ridiculous as this movie. I mean, take a look at this. The script is filled with comic book sounds and using boldface and increasing the font size. And then the aliens, they come crash, boom, and then it was like, wee woo, wee woo. That's what this reads like. Like it was written by the stenographer for a 5-year-old. Here's the thing that really gets me, and it's something we can all learn. There actually was a story to tell inside this idea. The Substance was an easy vehicle to tell a story about how Hollywood chews up women and spits them out, how some women can be so desperate for validation that they would sell their souls, their futures, even their health, just to be the most adored person beneath a spotlight. Is this a compelling story? No, not really. But it's a cohesive one. Telling me that Hollywood is full of narcissists and evil people is about as obvious as making a movie about how the sky is blue. I don't need 2 hours of that either. The body horror aspect of this movie, for me, is whatever. Quite honestly, the 1989 film Society did something far more gross in its climax, was equally ham-fisted in its metaphors, and still managed to tell a singular and cohesive narrative. I'm not saying go watch that movie. I mean, I did when I was a teenager, and it truly is the kind of body horror you don't ever forget. But it wasn't exactly groundbreaking either. Neither was it Oscar-worthy cinema, and it was still a more coherent film than The Substance. All told, the film teaches us a lot about pitfalls to avoid, about writing clean, both in tight, believable scripts and characters, but also in actual printed page. Increasing font size is not a cute way to explain rising tension or volume. Second, we talked about this last week. Write what you know. If you try to tackle a character or setting you know absolutely nothing about, you're going to wind up basing it on what little you do know, or what your expectations of it are. Audiences can smell that lack of experience and authenticity a mile away. If you want to tell a story with a message, that's great. Before you begin though, how complex is the message you're trying to tell? Is it worth the investment, or does it drive to the heart of your narrative in a way that is both satisfying and makes people think? Why is this message at the heart of the narrative? Does it have something new to say on the subject, or is it just pointing out something that we all already know? Your characters should resonate as people, but also they should be grounded in the world that they live in. The network director in this film was a cartoon character of a scummy, evil TV executive. You can have cartoon characters in your work. I mean, look at The Mask with Jim Carrey. He was almost literally a cartoon character. At the same time, he was a silly character in a silly world where his story can take place, and none of it really felt that out of place. Speaking of being out of place, if you've followed me a while, you know as a writer I am very dialogue-centric. Emotional responses, even outbursts, are part of the human condition. They still follow a cause and effect relationship. Yes, this character may have said and done a thing that has made their partner have a disproportional reaction, but that's because the real cause of their blow-up was something else. The action preceding the outburst was just the final straw. We need to follow that cause and effect relationship. If the audience is questioning the baffling narrative, you've taken them out of the story. They can't suspend disbelief anymore. The Substance asks for more suspension of disbelief in its first 5 minutes than the science fiction aspect of The Substance itself. Think about that. The drug that makes you a vessel to hatch a younger clone of you is asking less suspension of disbelief than Dennis Quaid eating like a pig in a restaurant. We learned a lot from this film. Was it good? No, absolutely not. I was actually offended by how dumb it was. Doubly so with the awards it won. But instead of worrying about it heralding the downfall of cinema, though surely it was a low-ranking horseman of the apocalypse, let it fuel you to write better. If you found yourself saying, I can write better than this, while watching a movie, time to prove it. We need as many of us out there as we can get, because it is getting bleak out here. If I sounded like I really despised this movie, the writer, and everything that this film stands for, that's because I did. I have never heard of a film that got so many undeserved accolades and buzz around it. But you know where I stand. Sound off in the comments about how you felt about the movie. Don't forget to check out my author page, the link is in the description below. Maybe wash your mind out from this film. You can also find the link to my newsletter in the comments, where you can get a free book, read about my latest projects, and find indie authors and get your next great read. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see new videos, and as always, have fun and get crafting.